Have you ever been told you're not good enough, that you don't belong? What if I told you that the very thing you're being dismissed for could be your greatest strength? Stick with me, and let's show the world that dreams aren't just for the lucky, they're for the determined. The sun hung low over the city, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks, as Tanya Wilson walked toward the leasing office of the upscale apartment complex. Her mind raced, bouncing between the excitement of finally finding a place that seemed to offer everything her daughter, Amara, deserved, and the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. It had taken her years to save enough for a security deposit, to scrape together a hope that she could give Amara a better life than the one they had endured. Now, standing in front of those glass doors, Tanya felt a mix of hope and fear. She pushed the door open, the cool air from the air conditioning hitting her like a slap. Inside, the leasing office was pristine, gleaming countertops, spotless floors, and a wide open reception area that gave the place the air of exclusivity. As she approached the counter, the receptionist barely glanced up from her desk, her eyes scanning the screen of her computer with detached precision. Tanya cleared her throat. "I'm here about the apartment listing. I'd like to inquire about availability." The receptionist finally looked up, her gaze flicking over Tanya's appearance. Worn shoes, a faded blazer, hair pulled back in a hurried bun. She barely suppressed a look of judgment before giving Tanya a tight smile. "Of course, let me just check." There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking as the receptionist typed. Tanya could feel her pulse quickening, the anticipation growing in her chest. This was it. This could be the moment she'd been working for, the beginning of something better for her daughter. The receptionist's eyes flickered back up to her. Well, I don't think this complex is really the best fit for you." Tanya blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You see," the receptionist continued, now speaking with an odd, almost condescending tone, "this building is designed for higher-income professionals. It's a quiet community and, well, we don't usually rent to single mothers." Tanya's chest tightened. She could feel the color rising in her cheeks. But she didn't let herself flinch. She had heard this before, this subtle, insidious judgment, as if being a single mother automatically made her less worthy of something better. She thought about Amara, only 8 years old, and how she had made so many sacrifices for this moment. To hear those words, cold and dismissive, it felt like the world itself was telling her she didn't belong. I, "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Tanya said, her voice trembling despite herself. "I've worked hard to get here. I have the means to pay rent, and I can provide stability for my daughter." The receptionist didn't even blink, leaning back in her chair with an air of indifference. "I'm afraid it's just policy. We don't make exceptions." Tanya's heart sank. She wanted to argue, to raise her voice, but she knew better. If she pushed too hard, she'd be labeled the difficult woman. She'd be dismissed even further. She forced herself to nod, despite the sting behind her eyes. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she turned to leave. Each step away from the leasing office felt like a victory and a defeat at the same time. Tanya's mind swirled with anger, frustration, and humiliation. But beneath all of that, something else began to rise. An ember, small but burning with fierce intensity. No one would ever make her feel this small again. Not for being a single mother, not for daring to dream. As she walked back to her car, Tanya looked up at the building one last time. There, behind those pristine windows, was the life she had always wanted. And no matter what it took, she was going to have it. She just had to get there on her own terms. The rejection still stung, but it wasn't the kind that could keep Tanya down for long. The fire inside her burned brighter than any shame, any humiliation. She was used to fighting, for herself, for Amara, for every inch of dignity the world had tried to strip away. That day, walking away from the leasing office, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just going to be a statistic. She wasn't going to be the single mom who took whatever scraps she was given and stayed silent. She was going to rise. It wasn't easy. Nothing ever was. The days blurred together as she juggled the many hats she wore. By day, Tanya worked as a waitress at a local diner, always hustling, always on her feet, trying to earn enough to make ends meet. By night, she pored over real estate books and took online courses. The idea of owning property, of owning something that could give her the power and control she'd always lacked, was intoxicating. Amara, always by her side, had long since stopped asking for fancy toys or clothes. Her dreams, like her mother's, were practical. Amara's greatest wish was to have a room of her own, decorated however she liked. Tanya would make that happen. Someday. It was the only thing that kept her going during the long shifts, when her feet ached and the exhaustion settled into her bones like a constant companion. Each night, Tanya would return home, exhausted but determined. She'd sit at the kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee at her side, and scroll through pages of property listings, absorbing everything she could about investment opportunities and property management. Some nights her eyes would glaze over with the weight of it all, but she refused to let the fatigue take hold. She had seen what it felt like to be told no. She refused to let that be the end of her story. Weeks turned into months, and Tanya's resolve only deepened. She found a local women's group for single mothers, a community of women who had been where she was and had found ways to make a different life for themselves. They taught her about finances, about credit scores, about how to negotiate with landlords and lenders. Every lesson she absorbed felt like another weapon in her arsenal, another step closer to the goal she had set for herself. She saved every penny she could. The long hours at the diner were grueling, but Tanya kept her eyes on the prize. Every tip, every extra shift, it all went toward the dream she was building. It wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about building a legacy for Amara, showing her that nothing, not even the sharp sting of rejection, could keep them from their goals. It was on one particularly grueling night, after a double shift that left her drained to the bone, that Tanya received a phone call that would change everything. It was a local real estate agent, one she had reached out to months ago, but hadn't heard from in weeks. Tanya had nearly given up hope, but there, on the other end of the line, was an opportunity, a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood, just the kind of fixer-upper she could afford. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning, the start of everything she had worked for. She felt a thrill run through her as she made an appointment to see the property the next day. She couldn't wait to get her hands on it. She could already picture it, renovated, thriving, and eventually turning a profit. This was her moment. It was more than just about buying property. It was about proving to herself and to the world that she was capable of more than they had ever given her credit for. As she lay in bed that night, a rare, quiet moment in her life, Tanya felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't victory yet, but it was close. All the hard work, the sacrifices, the long nights, each one had been a step in the direction of her dream. And now, it was finally beginning to take shape. Tanya stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the sleek building that had once made her feel so small, so invisible. The apartment complex gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight, its tall glass windows reflecting the world around it like a polished mirror. The trees lining the sidewalk were well maintained, their leaves a rich green, and the fountain in the courtyard bubbled with the soft hum of tranquility. Everything about the place screamed elite. And yet, as Tanya stood there, it felt different. This wasn't the place of rejection anymore. This was a place she would soon own. It had been years since that humiliating day when she'd been told, "This ain't a place for single mothers." She could still hear the condescending tone in the receptionist's voice, the way the woman's eyes had scanned her with that dismissive air, as if her very presence in the lobby was an inconvenience. But Tanya wasn't that woman anymore. She had changed. She had fought for a future, clawed her way up from the bottom, and now she was staring at the same building that once turned her away. This time, things would be different. She walked toward the entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and revenge. The same leasing office that had once shut its doors to her was still inside, behind those glass doors, hidden away in the sterile confines of the building. Tanya pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cool, almost too cold, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. The receptionist, a new face, looked up from her desk with a smile that felt rehearsed, like it was pasted on for the sake of good customer service. Tanya noticed the new woman's eyes flicker across her, sizing her up with the same calculating glance the last receptionist had given her. But Tanya didn't flinch. She didn't care what this woman saw. She was here for business. "I'd like to inquire about the availability of the apartments," Tanya said, her voice steady, strong. Her eyes met the receptionist's, unwavering. The woman smiled, but Tanya saw the hesitation behind her eyes. She was sizing her up again, but this time, Tanya didn't feel the sting of judgment. She was no longer someone who needed to prove herself. She had done that over and over, with each sacrifice, each sleepless night. She had fought for her success, and she was here now to claim it. "I'll check the listings for you," the receptionist said, tapping away on her keyboard. The silence between them stretched, and Tanya's mind wandered back to the old leasing office. She remembered the way the staff had dismissed her, the coldness in their eyes as if she were a threat they didn't want to deal with. But now there was a quiet satisfaction inside her. This wasn't about getting an apartment. This was about rewriting the story. The receptionist looked up again, her face now blank. "Unfortunately, it seems we don't have any availability at the moment." Tanya nodded. "I wasn't looking for an apartment, actually. I was hoping to inquire about purchasing the building." The receptionist blinked, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Purchasing? I'm afraid that's not something we typically—" "I'm the new owner," Tanya cut in, a smile tugging at her lips. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet power. "I just wanted to stop by and introduce myself." The receptionist's face fell, her mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. Tanya had never seen such a complete shift in expression. The woman who had been so quick to dismiss her now had no words. Tanya turned and walked out of the leasing office, her head held high. As she passed the reception desk, she caught a glimpse of the building's nameplate above the counter. The Laurels. She hadn't been able to afford it back then, but she could afford it now. And as she stepped out into the sunlight, Tanya felt the weight of the years of struggle, rejection, and sacrifice lift from her shoulders. She had arrived. The world had doubted her, but she had never doubted herself. And now she was the one in control. As she walked away from the building, Tanya couldn't help but smile. The future was hers, and it had just begun. The moment Tanya stepped out of the leasing office, she could feel the weight of what she had just said hanging in the air like a secret, a promise to herself that would soon be made real. "I'm the new owner." Those words had slipped out so easily, as though they had been rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind. But now, as she walked away from the building, something deeper began to stir inside her, a sense of urgency, of something bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't enough just to dream anymore. She had put herself in this position, but now she had to make it real. The building was hers to own, but the journey was far from over. Tanya's mind raced as she walked down the street, imagining what would come next. She had always known the power of hard work, but now she would need something more. She needed resources, connections, and most of all, courage. This was a whole new level of challenge, one that required more than just grit. She made her way to a nearby cafe, the warm hum of conversation and clinking cups, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She sat down at a table, her phone already in her hand. The numbers she needed were all in her contacts, lenders, investors, people she had met along her journey who might be able to help her make this dream a reality. But as she scrolled through the list, the weight of the task ahead settled in. There were so many barriers to break, so many people who would doubt her, just as they had before. With a deep breath, Tanya made the first call. The voice on the other end was polite, but it lacked the warmth she had hoped for. "Purchasing an entire complex?" the man asked, his tone skeptical. "Well, that's not exactly the type of thing we usually approve without a track record." Tanya's fingers tightened around the phone. It was a familiar game, one she had played before, but she wasn't backing down now. "I've done my research," she replied, her voice steady. "I have the financing, the plan, and the vision. What I need is someone willing to believe in it." There was a long pause, and Tanya could almost hear the wheels turning on the other end. Finally, he spoke again, this time with more interest. "All right, I'll send you the paperwork. We'll see what you can put together." Her heart beat faster. It wasn't a yes, but it was something. It was a door cracking open. The next few weeks became a blur of meetings, paperwork, and negotiation. Tanya found herself in boardrooms, sitting across from men in expensive suits who didn't know her story, didn't know the sacrifices she had made, the weight of what it had taken to get to this point. They saw a woman who was a newcomer in the game, someone who lacked the polished experience they expected. But Tanya's presence spoke louder than anything she could say. She had done her homework, had learned the language of business, and knew exactly what she was asking for. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she felt her resolve falter, when the doubt crept in. But with each step, Tanya found a new kind of strength. She was no longer the woman who had been turned away at the leasing office. She was the woman standing tall, demanding a seat at the table. By the time the offer for the building was officially accepted, Tanya knew that she wasn't just buying real estate. She was buying her future and the future of every person who had ever been told they couldn't achieve something because of who they were. The moment was hers, and she had seized it. She smiled to herself as she sat in her car, the contract in her lap, a new chapter of her life unfolding. The complex was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope, of a dream that refused to be broken. Tanya was no longer just a mother trying to survive. She was a force to be reckoned with. The first time Tanya walked through the doors of the building she now owned, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. It was a far cry from the sleek, polished complex that had once rejected her. The walls, although sturdy, bore the marks of time. Cracked tiles in the lobby, worn carpet that had long lost its luster, and faded paint that had once been white, but was now a dull, off gray. But Tanya didn't see decay. She saw potential. Every flaw was an opportunity for transformation. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. It was Amara, asking if she could stay up a little longer to finish her homework. Tanya smiled, her heart swelling. It wasn't just about the building. It was about providing a future for her daughter, a place that Amara could be proud of. Tanya could already see it in her mind. The fresh coats of paint, the polished floors, the updated appliances. But first, she needed to figure out where to start. The renovations would take time, but Tanya had learned something important during her journey. Nothing worth having came without hard work. She couldn't afford to hire a full team of contractors yet, but she knew how to stretch every dollar, how to prioritize the changes that would bring the biggest impact. Her plan was simple: start small, make it beautiful, and prove to herself and to others that she had what it took to rebuild this place from the ground up. She pulled up a list of supplies on her phone: paint, new flooring, basic repairs. She could tackle the entryway herself, the lobby, and work her way through the rest of the building as she saved. It wouldn't be fast, but it would be steady. And that steady progress would show the world that she wasn't just a single mother trying to survive. She was a businesswoman who was about to redefine what success looked like. Her first task was the lobby. It was the first thing tenants saw when they walked into the building. It was a simple area, but it made a statement. Tanya's hands were calloused from years of waitressing, but she didn't mind. She rolled up her sleeves and began scraping away the old peeling wallpaper. The smell of dust filled the air as she took to sanding down the scuffed wood paneling. With every swipe, every motion, she felt herself drawing closer to her vision. A space where tenants would feel a sense of pride. A space where her daughter could one day bring her friends without feeling ashamed. It wasn't glamorous work. It was tiring, exhausting even. But Tanya kept at it, knowing that the transformation wouldn't come without sweat. She worked into the late hours, the hum of a lone music playlist her only company as she painted the walls a soft, warm beige. She had always admired buildings that had character, that told a story. Now she was creating that story herself, brick by brick, stroke by stroke. As the weeks passed, Tanya's vision slowly began to take shape. The lobby transformed from a neglected, unwelcoming space into a bright, inviting entryway. New lighting fixtures illuminated the room, casting a warm glow on the freshly painted walls. The once worn carpeting was replaced with sleek hardwood floors that gleamed underfoot. Every change she made, Every bit of progress made her feel more connected to the building. She was not only repairing the physical space, but she was rebuilding something else too, her own sense of self. The quiet confidence she had gained from taking control of her own future was growing stronger with each passing day. And every time one of the tenants complimented her on the improvements, a sense of pride swelled in her chest. But Tanya knew this was just the beginning. The lobby was only the first step. She had a long way to go. There were more repairs to be made, more walls to repaint, more tenants to win over. But as she stood in the middle of the lobby, admiring the transformation, Tanya realized something important. She had come further than she'd ever imagined. The story of rejection, the story of the woman they had told wasn't good enough, was already a thing of the past. Tanya Wilson wasn't just a survivor. She was a creator, a builder, and soon she would be a force in this city. And this building, once a symbol of her defeat, was now a testament to her victory. The soft click of the door closing behind her was the only sound Tanya could hear as she stepped into her office for the first time. The building was almost unrecognizable now. The lobby had been completely transformed. The tenants were slowly beginning to notice the improvements, and the energy in the air had shifted. But now Tanya faced her greatest challenge yet, keeping everything moving forward. The reality of being a landlord was nothing like the dream she had imagined. The steady stream of work, the constant juggling of repairs, tenant requests, and business meetings, it was a far cry from the quiet satisfaction of painting a wall or laying down a new floor. Tanya had learned early on that owning property wasn't just about fixing things up. It was about managing people, understanding what made them tick, and above all, keeping them happy. A disgruntled tenant could spell trouble, and Tanya had no intention of letting anything derail the progress she had made. She sat down at her desk, flipping through the growing stack of paperwork. There were lease renewals to sign, invoices to approve, and financial statements to scrutinize. It was overwhelming, but she knew she had no choice but to dive in. She had come this far. There was no going back. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from one of her tenants, an older woman named Mrs. Carter, who had been living in the building for years. Tanya had made a point of personally introducing herself to each resident when she first took over, and Mrs. Carter had quickly become one of her biggest supporters. The message was short. "The new lighting in the hallway is lovely, Tanya. I've noticed the change." "Thank you." A small smile tugged at the corner of Tanya's lips. This was the kind of thing that kept her going. The little victories, the moments when she saw the fruits of her labor being appreciated. The renovations were paying off in more ways than one. But as she replied to Mrs. Carter, her phone buzzed again, this time with an email. The subject line made her stomach drop. "Urgent maintenance request, apartment 12B." Tanya's fingers hovered over the screen as she read the message. "There's a serious plumbing issue in the apartment. Water leaking from the ceiling. The tenant is requesting immediate attention." Her heart sank. Plumbing issues were never easy, and dealing with tenants in a crisis was always a challenge. She quickly dialed the number for her handyman Carlos, hoping he could get there as soon as possible. As the phone rang, Tanya's mind raced with a list of other things she needed to take care of: tenant complaints, paperwork, financial obligations. But none of that mattered now. The priority was making sure the tenant's issue was resolved. Carlos picked up on the third ring. "Tanya, what's up?" "There's a leak in 12B, she explained quickly. "Can you get there today? It's urgent." "I'll be there in an hour," he assured her. Relief washed over her, but Tanya knew this wasn't going to be the last emergency she'd face. The job required more than just managing the property. It required her to put out fires, constantly balancing the needs of the building and its tenants while making sure her vision didn't slip through the cracks. But she was determined to rise to the occasion. As she hung up the phone, she leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had come this far. She had worked too hard to let anything, no matter how challenging, stop her now. Every setback, every problem was just another opportunity to prove that she belonged here. The building, once a place that had rejected her, was now her responsibility. And that responsibility was her greatest triumph. An hour later, Carlos called back to confirm the leak had been fixed. Tanya thanked him, grateful for the quick response. She walked through the halls of the building, surveying the progress with a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and with each challenge, she became more confident in her ability to overcome whatever came next. Tanya wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, building something that couldn't be torn down. With each tenant helped, every repair completed, she was carving out a place for herself in this world, a place where she belonged. The building had become a reflection of Tanya herself, resilient, growing, and impossible to ignore. What had once been a cold, indifferent space was now filled with life, warmth, and purpose. The tenants knew her by name, and she knew theirs. She had rebuilt more than just walls and floors. She had built trust, respect, and a community. But even in the quietest of moments, Tanya could feel the undercurrent of tension pulling at her. It wasn't just the daily grind that wore on her. It was the looming uncertainty. There had been whispers in the neighborhood, rumors of a potential sale. Investors had been circling, waiting for the right moment to swoop in. Tanya's mind raced with the possibility of losing everything she had worked for. The idea of someone else taking over, of losing her hard-earned stake in the building, was a threat she couldn't ignore. She had worked too hard to let anyone take it away from her. One afternoon, Tanya stood in the hallway on the second floor, inspecting the new fire alarms she had installed. The soft beep of the system checking itself echoed in the silence, reminding her of the safety she had worked so tirelessly to ensure for her tenants. As she finished her walkthrough, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name, Vance Green. Vance was one of the investors she had met early in her journey, a man whose polished demeanor had initially seemed to promise support. But Tanya knew better now. She had learned that the world of investors was not one for dreams. It was one for numbers and leverage. She hesitated before answering. Tanya, Vance's voice was smooth, almost too smooth. I wanted to touch base with you about the property. There's interest, you know. The market's hot right now, and the timing couldn't be better for a sale. I think you should consider it. Tanya's fingers tightened around the phone. The words felt like a betrayal, a knife twisted in the very thing she had fought to build. She had worked for years, scraping, clawing, proving herself to get here. And now this man was trying to take it from her, without even understanding what this building meant to her. I'm not interested in selling, Vance, she said, her voice steady, but the fire behind it was unmistakable. This is my property. I've put everything into it, and I'm not giving it up. There was a brief silence on the other end before Vance spoke again. You know, Tanya, it's not always about what you want. This is business. I just thought I'd give you a heads up. But if you want to be stubborn about it, he let the words hang in the air, a thinly veiled threat disguised as friendly advice. I'm not being stubborn, Tanya replied, her voice now colder, more assured. I'm just not selling. Not now, not ever. This building is my future. It's my legacy, and I'm not letting anyone take that from me. Vance laughed softly, but it lacked the warmth of their earlier conversations. Well, we'll see about that. You might find that things aren't as simple as you think. Tanya hung up the phone, her pulse quickening. She could feel the storm brewing, and this time she wouldn't run from it. She had faced the cold rejection of the leasing office, the doubt of the investors, and now she would face this too. She wasn't going to let anyone push her out of what she had worked so hard to build. But as she stood there, a sense of unease settled in. This was more than just a fight for ownership. It was a fight for respect, for her place in the world. The building was just the beginning. There was no turning back now. Tanya walked through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She had fought for this, and she would fight to keep it. With every passing day, the stakes were getting higher. But Tanya had never been one to back down. The storm was coming, but she was ready. And this time she wouldn't just survive, it was time to win. The sun had barely risen when Tanya pulled up to the building that had once been her battleground. Now it felt like her fortress. The apartment complex stood tall against the city skyline, its walls gleaming in the morning light. It had been a long road, harder than she could have ever imagined. But Tanya had made it. Today, it wasn't just about the building anymore. It was about proving once and for all that she belonged. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. The negotiations with Vance and the other investors had reached a boiling point. They'd underestimated her, dismissed her as a woman with a dream too big for her own good. But Tanya had outmaneuvered them, piece by piece. She had negotiated with banks, lined up investors who believed in her vision, and turned every roadblock into an opportunity. What Vance had failed to realize was that he wasn't just up against a woman trying to make ends meet. He was up against someone who knew how to turn adversity into triumph. As Tanya stepped into the building, her heels clicking against the freshly polished floors, she couldn't help but smile. It had all come down to this. Today was the day she would officially meet with the city's investors, the ones who would determine the fate of her future. They had given her one final chance to prove that she had what it took. One final pitch. She wasn't going to waste it. Walking past the tenants who greeted her with nods and smiles, Tanya entered her office. The room, which had once felt cold and foreign, now felt like home. She had built this space not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever doubted her. Every decision, every renovation had been a step towards something bigger. The building was no longer just a structure, it was a symbol of perseverance, of the power of self-belief. Her phone buzzed again. It was an email from Vance. He had been silent for weeks, but his message was short and blunt. "I'll be there at 10 a.m. Let's make this official." Tanya knew what that meant. He was coming to finally close the deal he thought he could dictate. But he had no idea how much she had grown, how much power she had gained since that first day. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the leasing office, desperate to prove herself. She was a force now, someone who had learned how to fight for what was hers. At 10 a.m. sharp, Vance walked through the door. His expensive suit, his polished smile, none of it had any power over her anymore. Tanya stood, her posture straight, her eyes locked onto his. There was no fear, no hesitation. "Ready to sell?" he asked, his tone oozing with false confidence. Tanya smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Number, I'm not selling. This building is mine, and I'm not going anywhere." Vance's face faltered for the briefest of moments before he masked it with a shrug. "We'll see how long that lasts. You'll need more than just willpower to keep it afloat. This isn't a charity project." Tanya's eyes didn't waver. "I've built something real here, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated. This place isn't for sale, Vance. It's part of who I am now." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Vance seemed to sense it. He had no more leverage. Tanya had won, and the building was a testament to that victory. As Vance left, his arrogance fading with every step, Tanya felt the weight of years of struggle lift from her shoulders. The battle was over. She had fought for her place in the world, for her dignity, for her future, and she had won. Standing by the window, Tanya looked out at the city. The skyline was no longer an imposing presence. It was hers now. This was her world, and she had earned every inch of it. She wasn't just a single mother anymore. She was a businesswoman, a leader, and the world would know her name. In the end, Tanya didn't just take back what was hers. She built something bigger than herself. She turned rejection into resilience, doubt into determination, and a dream into reality. This wasn't just about owning a building. It was about owning her story. In this story, it was only the beginning.